Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about the build that started with Paladins and ended up not using Paladins at all. The no Paladin shield build. Well, when the Archon Prophecy expansion came out, I wanted to use Paladins because I thought Paladins are cool. I can't play Paladins. I make this joke a lot, you're gonna have to keep hearing it, so laugh every time I say it. I can't play Paladins in Path of Exile 2, I can't play Paladins in Diablo 4, so I might as well play Paladins in Age of Wonders 4. Unfortunately, as this build was fleshed out, I came to the harsh reality that there's really no way to make Tome of Virtue work in a proper build that uses shield units. Shield units are already one of the weakest class types in the game. Down there, I think they're above ranged units for sure, but they're of all the melee unit types, they're definitely the weakest. So we're already playing from behind. The Tome of Virtue itself didn't really work for me, and this is a build video, so I'm just going to go into my thoughts on all this. I'm just going to say up front, there's going to be a lot of me just talking. If you want to hear me talking and going over a build, that's great. You can put me on your second monitor, you can put me on your TV, and you can just listen along to me talking. If that annoys you, then I don't even know why you clicked on this video, because that's pretty much what I do in every video. And if you listen to it, maybe you won't actually hate it, and maybe instead you'll like it. Before I go any further, I'm just gonna remind myself right now, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to leave a comment down below. All these things help me immensely, and as you might have noticed, the Age of Wonders 4 videos, I've been making a lot more of them, despite the fact that they get a few, I think they're getting less views on average, but because I'm making like 3 times more of them, the actual view count is up rather substantially for the channel. So yeah, you guys have just been wonderful, I guess is what I'm saying. So thank you, everybody. Let's talk about the Tome of Virtue. In fact, in order to talk about the Tome of Virtue, we actually need to talk about Tier 2. Tier 2 tomes. Why? Because Tier 2 tomes for melee is very cramped. The Tome of the Construct is basically an automatic grab if you're playing melee, so long as you're not playing shock, and even sometimes if you're playing shock. Cascading Command Reposition allows you to get hastened and strengthened in a giant line, effectively hastening your entire board. That's outrageously powerful. That's the Tier 5 Chaos Tome right there, which says a lot about how weak the Tier 5 Chaos Tome is. You thought I wasn't going to work in complaining about Chaos being bad in every video, and you're wrong, because I will do it in every video. Cascading Command Reposition is outrageously strong, and as of this expansion, Cascading Command Defend has been reworked. Reworked to do what, you might be asking? Well, you now get Defensive Masters, so instead of entering defense mode right when you cast a spell, which made it very difficult to use, basically unworkable, you now enter defense mode at the end of your turn. So you cast Cascading Command Defend, then you run up all your units, use their turn after you break the line, and then you will go into defense mode. Then at the beginning of your next turn, you can reform the line, cast it again, and then you can go into defense mode and hit a bunch of people. Well, I suppose you could hit a bunch of people and enter defense mode afterwards. So usability went up considerably. In addition to that, it now dispels 2 negative effects, which gives it a rather good board control, because dispelling 2 negative effects from potentially your entire board on top of everybody always being in defense mode makes a lot of different unit types good. Specifically, units that have shield wall and units that are support units. These units do very good with Cascading Command Defend. And of course, Compounding Defense applies to shield, polearms, and fighters, so shield units work right in there. At any rate, I say at any rate too many times. I watch my own videos and I'm like, damn, would that idiot stop saying at any rate every 5 seconds? At any rate, Tome of the Construct is just really good, and you basically need it in every melee build. In addition to that, there is another problem where there is the Tome of Shades. Tome of Shades gives you Living Shadows and Shadow Blades that when combined, they can make you blind enemies just for being hit, and then allow you to ignore 50% of their defense and resistance, which is very powerful. It also gives you a little bit of knowledge, not that much, but it just allows you to scale very well the Tome of Shades. particularly with the construct, the angel construct thing that just auto blinds in AoE. That one's quite good for this. So there is a lot of incentive to use these very, very powerful tier 2 tomes. There's also a term of artificing, which, as you might imagine, is really, really strong. There's Tome of Revelry, which is insanely strong. And so tier 2 tomes are just very cramped for a melee build. So the more and more I tried to force in this Tome of Virtue, I just found myself thinking that there's really no reason to be trying to use the Tome of Virtue. When we actually look at its effects, you get 1 defense and 1 resistance when below 60% max hit points, which is not very good. We get 2 spirit resist, which only affects us if we're fighting spirit damage. The House of Charity should be an SPI, and if it wasn't the single province of Bourbon, then maybe it should be a bit stronger as a building. If you look at most of the order buildings, like Tome of the Beacon, we can see not Tome of the Beacon, Tome of the Inquisition, we can see the Tribunal gives knowledge to help us out. We can see from the Tome of Faith that the Covenant gives knowledge to help us out. But in the Tome of Virtue, suddenly the House of Charity gives us food and production, which I find odd because food is not really an order thing to begin with. It has some things in order, some light synergy, like the Tome of Faith. The Abbey gives knowledge per adjacent farm, but food is more of a chaos thing, and food is more of a nature thing. It's not that often in order. So it's one of the only order buildings, at least in the first 2 tomes, that doesn't give any knowledge. So we have no province improvement to work with. We have to spend one of our researches to get a pretty lackluster building. We finally get a unit, so we research a unit that's a side grade to another unit. And then we get Virtuous Spirit, which is just definitely not on the same par as things like, again, Revelry, Construct, any of these, really. I mean, even if all we're doing is try to tank and beat down enemies, even Artisan Armaments can be good because crits reduce enemy morale, so you can just crit them and eventually get them off the board. So what I'm trying to say here is I just had to give up on the Paladin because the tier 2 tomes are just too cramped. So what do we end up doing? Then how did we make this build work? Well, the first thing came down to I started trying with architects, and I realized, well, I'm going to be frank with you, architects are really overpowered right now. And while I could probably hard force the architect shield unit, first off, it was bugged. They finally fixed the bug, and now lots of people just don't really like architects because they've been kind of min-maxed out, and at the very least in multiplayer, it's very overpowered right now. I do expect a slight rework in the future. So without crutching on architects who might not be here in a few months, what is the next best shield unit to use? What actually is a very good, in fact, shield unit to use? So realistically, if we're looking at our tier 3 shield units, we've got some cultures that do have one. We have Industrious, which has the Bastion, who basically doesn't exist because he's been power creeped off the planet. 2 resistance, really? Then we have Feudal with the Liege Guard, the Chad, the absolute best dude out there, coming in here with 6-3 stat line and then a heavy shield giving him another 1-1. So if he can't be flanked, that's a 7-4 unit with 100 HP. Then Feudal Aristocracy gives you 10 to 40 HP. This dude right here is a truck. He can't die. Now, of course, you might be saying, okay, but those stats only apply if you're not being flanked. Well, once again, do remember, Tome of the Construct, Linked Minds, Hyper Awareness. When standing next to a construct or another unit with Linked Minds, you get Hyper Awareness. Immunity to flanking. You might then be seeing where this is going. If we have a way to get ourselves repeatedly into defense mode, and we have a way to completely invalidate flanking against us, our shields actually become pretty decent. So how did we make this build work? Well, I lost a lot trying to make it work, but eventually it kind of came together for me, and I figured out how I could finally get this all to play out. Now, of course, Feudal Aristocracy does have one issue. Oh, well, I should say shield builds have one issue. If you are trying to end on Exemplars to be your hard carry, Exemplars have a quirk where they are a mounted unit who will never take any other mount. That's because they are on the best mount. That's true. Exemplars are literally on a flying mount, and as such will never have this mount replaced by any other mount. They are flying. They have 120 HP, an 8-3 stat line, graceful defense. They, as you've been seeing here, have been buffed up massively by this expansion. Embolden Allies puts you into defense mode and is usable on turn 1. Graceful defense, so you can just get grace for entering defense mode. And Zeal. Now the Zeal is a bit awkward, I'll admit, because if they have Zeal, then getting Zeal from the Tome of Zeal doesn't stack with it, which is no good. We don't want to get Zeal and then later in the game our buff just stops working. Even if Exemplars come into the game so late that we could go Tome of Zeal and get it to work, I wanted to have a build that could consistently play out even into the late game. How are we going to do that? Okay, so number 1, strong. Why? We're tanky. And we're so tanky, in fact, that we kind of actually need to do more damage, because if enemies never die, then they just keep hitting you until you die, right? We also very much like physical damage. This adds physical damage. I will get into that later. And we have, of course, defensive tactics. As you might imagine, a shield wall does best with defensive tactics. For 2 points, it's just outrageously useful. And then last we have Mount Masters. Now Mount Masters is a bit screwy with Feudal. It does screw with you a lot. Why? Because your defenders, until you can get 3 to 4 leveled up defenders in a stack, they have a very large tendency to run up and die solo. So I went back and forth on Mount Masters, and my defenders dying has definitely become a problem, particularly with the class I used for my Lord. And eventually I decided to just deal with it and brute force my way through the early game, because getting my defenders to 40 movement speed at one point was the ideal way to play it out. I do think you could play this build other ways, but I just figured, look, I'm getting them to very high movement speed very easily. It's just 1 point, and maybe we'll lose 3 or 4, 5, 6 defenders in the early game, which is definitely no good, but what are you gonna do? Then, of course, we are Feudal Aristocracy. That is to get the Liege Guard. Feudal Monarchy does not get the Liege Guard. Feudal Aristocracy does. Now, Feudal Aristocracy, as I did mention, also gives you a lot of HP and a lot of morale. All that morale turns into crit. Crit turns into reducing your enemy's morale, and, of course, doing more damage. So, Feudal Aristocracy, if we do get into the late game, will give us 40 HP, and we will frequently start at already high morale for 20% more crit. Crits in this game are 150% damage. 150% damage, that's 10% more damage with 40 more health. That's a pretty good deal. So Feudal Aristocracy gives us the exact unit we need, and it covers our early game needs by reducing unit upkeep and allowing us to heal more. It also covers our late game needs by making us outrageously tanky, because the build we'll be going with doesn't have as much HP as maybe plants. For our society traits, we went a bit hard on the scaling, potentially too hard on the scaling, but we can cover our early game by being feudal, and we can cover our early game by, well, frankly, mostly relying on tier 3 units, which are much easier to get out than tier 4 units. We do, of course, have a tier 4 unit, but it comes into the game way later. We went Devotees of Good because we just do good, and then we can vet units up. Remember that defenders will promote into Liege Guard once you get them to Legendary, so Devotees of Good helps that out a lot. And generally just, it's also Gold and Imperium, and getting Gold and Imperium is just good as well. We have Visions of Destiny Materium. Visions of Destiny Materium, once you have completed it, it did get nerfed recently because, frankly, all the visions were overpowered, and they all needed to be nerfed, but it's still good for a scaling choice now. What Vision of Destiny Materium does is all units in your entire faction, including everything, will do 50% more damage on a Retaliate. Not summons, though. Summons don't get the mark of Materium. Only actual casted units. Do note that. They don't get any marks. None of these marks apply to summons, which is important to know. At any rate, you will get 50% more retaliation damage, which also includes opportunity attacks and anything like that, and you will get +1 retaliation on shields. I think it's shields, fighters, and polearms. So shield units will by default have 2 retaliations. That's obviously quite good, because then that allows our shield units, once we do get the Mark Materium, to trade more effectively into opponents who also are maybe doing shield units or doing maybe having some fighters Charge units are a bit more difficult. Pole arms are obviously difficult with Pyro Templars, but you know, we do what we can with what we've got here. So we've got a build that scales pretty well. Maybe not the strongest early game, but again, we're only looking to power spike on tier 3 units. Now, tomes are a bit of an issue because Tome of Enchantment is just simply put not as good as other tomes. Summon Copper Golem is no zealot, and Awakened Tools is generally just considered significantly weaker than, what is that thing called? The actual good one, Fanatical Workforce. Because, unfortunately, Awakened Tools has a bad habit of putting you at an unstable city and then actually counteracting the amount of production you need. And then you will be putting your production into building stability buildings, which then makes you wonder, why did I even bother to get Awakened Tools anyway if all I'm doing it is building stability buildings to offset the penalty of Awakened Tools? I have the same question. Sometimes I wonder. But it does give you draft, which also allows you to punch out a few more units, particularly into the mid game. And it's got Rune Cover's Camp, which can give you more draft. So in a pinch, it's a good draft tome, but reasonably, I've never needed that much draft with this build. Spell Tempered Shields is pretty invaluable for this build because it gives all shield units and only shield units 1 resistance. Shield units are particularly weak to magic. It gives us 1 resistance and then another resistance for that unit and all adjacent units who are in defense mode. So if you are adjacent to 2 different allies, to your left and to your right, you get a resist and then a resist and then a resist, and you get 3 resist from Spell Tempered Shields, which of course makes you outrageously really tanky. Sundering Blades is how we can actually win fights if we have 2 or even 3 shield units beating the crap out of 1 dude, and then they have such little armor. A, we might as well just kill them, but B, even if we don't kill them, we can use Sundering Blades to set up damage for our lords and our heroes, which we'll get into later. Purging Arrows also exists, so that's pretty good. I decided to go with a champion because we're doing Devotees of Good, which only applies to your racial units. That's something that isn't on the tooltip that I wish was on the tooltip. So we're going with the champion. Champions can get the 2 XP per turn, which allows your defenders to level up quite quickly. Once you do get a staunch line of defenders, it ends up being really tanky. I decided to go with a ranger, despite warrior being unbelievably better in the early game, and maybe potentially just better all game. I don't really know. I found ranger to be quite devastating in this build if we did manage to get the late game. That's because with the Liege Guard and generally all the shield walls going on, the ranger will not die. He will sit in your line and he will be really annoying because he only needs 1 AP to do outrageous amounts of damage. And once enemies have their armor shred up, the ranger can come in and do over 100, sometimes 200 damage per round to absolutely annihilate his enemies. Other possibilities, of course, warrior, because they're just generally better in the early game and can probably keep your defenders alive by splitting up the enemy's damage. And I think that's about it. Defender can do okay, but if I went Defender, I would start to question, why am I doing Defender in a shield build? I mean, something's got to kill the enemy, right? Because again, given infinite time, if you never kill them, they'll eventually kill you. And then we decided to go with the sword and crossbow. Now, I did talk about the crowbow in my video talking about the early game farming, and the reason I decided to not go with crowbow was the build was quite slow. It was quite difficult to move around the map. Crowbow does help you farm a lot better. It's just generally better than sword and crossbow in the early game. I don't think anyone can argue with that. So why did I go sword and crossbow? Because you start with a mount. That's it. Crowbow is also an acceptable choice here. You'll be a bit slower, but sometimes you're slow anyway because you're so weak as a lord in the early game that your defenders will end up dying, and then you have to slow down and wait for more and blah blah blah. The problem is we're talking about 48 movement speed versus 32. If the gap was less wide, then I would probably go with the Crowmaster's bow. In fact, I still might go with this build with the Crowmaster's bow just to help farm out the early game and try to keep my defenders alive. It's just, I really like having 48 movement speed, particularly sometimes with map generation. It just sucks really hard to only have 32 movement speed, and you can kind of awkwardly end up losing the game. Some of these other weapons just don't really do anything. I think I would generally prefer to just have a regular crossbow in the early game. Unfortunately, the only crossbow you can go with, Hunter's crossbow, is actually a low damage crossbow, which doesn't really help you that much, because why do I want a low damage crossbow that does bonus damage to large targets? Now, I did spend a lot of time looking at the coefficients of different ranged weapons, because different ranged weapons will actually give more or less damage to the ranger special abilities, snapshot, sniper shot, and scatter shot, depending on what weapon type they are. The highest damage weapon types are the sword and net and the javelin, and then after that is the crossbow and the sword and crossbow. Now, sword and crossbow are weird, because sometimes you'll find the crossbow does more damage, sometimes you'll find the sword and crossbow does more damage. It really differs. The sword and crossbow is not the highest damage, but it does allow you to use a mount, and it does allow you to melee enemies in a pinch. Sometimes enemies just are hard to hit, and you can just hit them a lot, twice, from behind even, because they, you just happen to be there because you were running around shooting your crossbow at 1 AP. The bow will overall do more DPS, or just sitting there triple attacking, but the sword and crossbow has the advantage that it's only 1 AP. So you can run up to an enemy, pop, run up to an enemy, pop. You don't have to stand there and attack. And in particular, I think it just makes your auto battles play out way better. So I just decided to go with the sword and crossbow, and it's really bad in the early game, and it's not very good. But I just brute forced my way through it. So this, of course, takes us to our ambition, which might not surprise you when we went with Instructor. With so many units for Feudal dying and running in and out, I actually found Instructor was weirdly good at getting me to that second renown level pretty easily. Once you get to that second renown level, your units will get 20 more HP, not 10, which will help them considerably to actually start staying alive into a fight. You can see the remnants of how this build used to be with the Imperator, Orcish Paladins, and Marbellium. This used to be an Architect build and it used to be a Paladin build, but I just kept swapping it around because I didn't like it. Oh, I should mention, I decided to go with Raptors because I thought they were really cool. That's about it. I looked at all the different mounts and I thought, I think Raptors work the best here, because the idea of orcs on raptors is really cool. Now, you could say to yourself, okay, orcs on bears, orcs on where's the wargs. Okay, this is a little bit more thematic if you're doing Lord of the Rings maybe, but I just think that's silly. There's also orcs on ponies, which is just legitimately funny. I think everybody agrees it's just funny, but we're not really going for funny right now. We're going for orcs on raptors because it looks really cool and I just think it's cool. Okay, so we have Guthuk, the Imperator, Orcish Paladins, Marbellum. Okay, ambition, instructor just passively clears up, so it does just fine for me. This takes us to our tomes, because of course we did really weird tomes that did work in the jankiest way you could possibly ever have imagined. We started with Tome of Enchantment, which did work pretty well. We put that into a Tome of Discipline, which is weird, but it worked. Now, why did we go Tome of Discipline? Because we needed exactly one order and we needed exactly one Materium affinity. Here we go. And well, I guess the unfortunate reality was Sundering Blades in combination with Empowered Strikes also was really threatening for enemies. Particularly in early game fights, I found my enemies, other players, would just generally really afraid of getting triple hit by a Sundering Blade Empowered Strike combo, because they would end up at low status resist and have a pretty high chance of getting stunned. So we got lots of easy retaliates on them, and generally they just had to play afraid because they couldn't leave anyone in melee with my early game defenders or Liege Guard, because they would just get triple attacked. Status shred. Well, I mean, it's armor shred, but armor shred also reduces status resist. For those of you guys who don't know that, when you sunder defense, it's -1 defense and -1 status resist, which does actually make Empowered Strikes work. So these 1-2 combos gives me some pretty good early game power, because if players pick a fight with me early game, this build is not very strong early game, but these two combo together to kind of do a weird janky early game. Now, you do see here the Tome of Alchemy and the Tome of the Construct, and you're wondering, why would we go back for Tome of Alchemy? Why not go that earlier? I ask myself the same question. The general idea I have here is Tome of Enchantment and Tome of Discipline give us all the clearing power we need. Now, you can go these 4 tomes in any order, it's just that we need very specifically exactly these affinities to make it work. I do think that Tome of Faith would generally just work better with this build, but we have to go Tome of Alchemy because we need that Materium. and Alchemist Lab is totally fine as is. Now you can go Tome of Alchemy 3rd if you're not picking a fight with anybody, and you can just clear with Tome of Discipline, Tome of Enchantment. That works totally fine, and that allows you earlier access to that Alchemist Lab. You could go Alchemy 2nd even and just sprint out the Alchemist Lab. That's a fine option too. Really, it just comes down that you need these tomes. Tome of Enchantment is really good. Tome of Discipline, you need it for the affinity, and it's actually weirdly good with this build, and also it gives you Mantra of Purification, which is a bit helpful. And then, of course, Tome of the Construct, we've talked about it. Outrageously good tome for any melee build right now. And Tome of Alchemy's just got that Alchemist Lab, so we actually have some knowledge gain and can do something in the game. Additionally, we got the Material Refinery, which helps us get more cities set up with more gold, with more knowledge. Fumigation's a really good siege project. I think the Weekend was like weirdly bugged or something for a little bit and only lasted 1 turn. So like they would take their 1 turn and then Weekend would fall off. I don't know if that was intended or if I even imagined that, but Weekend lasts 3 turns now correctly. So when enemies start the fight with negative 20% damage and taking 16 blight damage, especially if you have harassed defenders, Fumigation's pretty strong at just knocking people out of cities if you do take a city fight against either a free city or another player. That of course is also Mysterious Tonic, which allows you to remove 1 negative status effect as a free action on support units, which is fine. It's not any, you know, it's clearly worse than Tome of Faith's free one, but it's fine. I think I would prefer it being 2 status debuffs, but I don't think anyone wants Tome of Alchemy buffed. Then, once we have all of these, we will end up with exactly, and I mean exactly, 8 Materium Affinity once we do the Tome of Geomancy. You might be wondering how. Well, of course, when you go back to our society traits, we get 2 Materium Affinity here. That 2 Materium Affinity is unfortunately not factored into these tomes. So generally speaking, by the time we get to tier 3 tomes, we will of course have that Vision of Destiny Materium completed, giving us the 50% more retaliate damage and giving us the +1 retaliate. I have thought about this different ways, if I should go with the Visions of Promise Materium instead to just set up a Giga City, but I think at the end of the day, shield units don't have long legs. They do reach a climax where they just kind of can't get any stronger than that. So having a Giga City is cool, but it doesn't really help us win the game. We can have infinite knowledge and our build will just eventually be outscaled by Pyre Templars. There's not much we can do about that. So I'd rather have Vision of Destiny Materium, take a worse early game for it, take worse effective knowledge scaling for it, and just make our units way stronger. Tome of Geomancy then gives us, you can count it here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus 2 is 8 Materium Affinity. Tome of Geomancy is kind of weird in this build, but the main thing we're looking for here is Geomantic Crystallization, because this gives us it gives us more damage, and that's really what we're looking for. Our build, as you have seen here, kind of lacks damage, and we just needed a little bit more damage to really make this work. I think maybe you can make this work with nature. I think a nature transformation could also work here as well, going from plants into force of nature, but the combination of Geomantic Crystallization with Resonant Blades, I think just worked better. Resonant Blades will generally apply a dot and generally counteract regeneration. Regeneration is kind of the bane of tanky builds, because if a unit regenerates, that means that, well, it's not taking damage because it just keeps regenerating every turn. You can't whittle away someone who just keeps regenerating. So Resonant Blades allows us to apply dots on enemies. Resonant Blades does have the weakness though, that if you're on frozen terrain, you will try to freeze enemies instead, which of course has the weakness that you don't really have any status penetration. But this build does, actually. Weirdly enough, this build actually can reduce the enemy's status resist with the weird Sundering Blades we went earlier. I assure you, this is as dumb as it sounds. Somehow, we've managed to make the one downside of Resonant Blades the fact that on any frost terrain, you don't apply a dot, you just try to freeze enemies helplessly at like a 10% chance every hit, which sometimes works, but generally is so unreliable that people just don't like it. It's fine when it hits, it's good when it hits, but ugh. So we got Geomantic Crystallization, Resonant Blades, these are good. Hall of Geomantic Resonance is also fine. It's a good pickup. It's fine. Realistically, that's about all we want from the tome. Geomancer, I don't really think we want. Summon Elemental, I also don't really think we want. Geomancer, we can't really make good anyway, so it would just be there to exist. So, I mean, you would pick up Geomancer just to have it, to look at it and be like, that's my Geomancer. Okay, Tome of Prophecies. We go to Tome of Prophecies 5th. Why do we go at 5th? Because we kind of have a problem here where, as you might imagine, charge builds completely obliterate us. Shield units do terribly into charge builds. There's not a whole lot you can do about it, unfortunately. But Tome of Prophecies kind of just hard counters charge builds, giving us a lot of momentum. Tome of Prophecies gives us the pretty good Oracle unit, but I've personally found that I don't really like going for the Oracle in the early game because the Bannerman over here is tier 2. He's pretty cheap. He's a cheap little dude, doesn't cost us much money, and he can ride a mount. So he will keep up with the defenders and the Liege Guard at 40 speed, whereas the Oracle will be down at 32 speed. I also find the defender to be weirdly good. He's got War Banner, he can run up and give allies defense and resist. He's got Soothing Standard, which he can just spam. That helps us get morale before we have more of our morale from later in the tree. The morale has actually saved me from rallying out sometimes, and this dude's just a little... I don't know, he's just a bugger. He can just get so tanky in this build by giving the defense mode warding to allies, which he can do a lot between Soothing Standard and between Cascading Command Defend. He will pretty much always be in defense mode. And then once he's in defense mode, he's just giving these allies all this resistance and status resistance, which just makes these shield units quite frustrating to deal with. Then he's got War Banner giving even more defense and resistance. And oh boy, he's just a very annoying dude for your enemies to deal with, of course. Now, the Oracle is better into the hyper late game with the Healing Portent, and also you can use Striking Portent. I guess you won't really need Fortune though, because the what are they called? Order Orb, the one that buffs your spells that you cast, gives 3 Fortune every time you use a buff spell on an ally. But we buff everyone with Cascading Command Defend. If used properly, if everybody's in the line, everyone gets 3 Fortune. That's a max. You can't get more than that. It's probably too strong. I'm gonna be real with you. They probably need to nerf that at some point. But for now, it's weirdly good and kind of just keeps you at permanent 3 Fortune. So we don't really need Striking Portent. So of course, that only leaves us with Healing Portent, which isn't... yeah. Healing Portent is every 3rd turn instead of every 2nd turn, and while it does give us precognition, which is useful against charge units to just be able to heal up, get precognition, hit the charge units, maybe then do a Cascading Command Defend, and then get another precognition so you can break through their retaliates. The reality is I feel like it's slow. It's like a slow support. It's like lumbering even. I don't know. But at any rate, the Tome of Prophecies gives us Prescient Circlets. Now, what is so good about this? Gain precognition when entering defense mode. Wow, even more damage reduction. And damage reduction that is so good that charge units will not like you. In fact, charge players will very much not like you. You will not like what they have to say about you. It's funny. It's really funny. It just destroys them. So for a build that is so weak to charge units, the Prescient Circlets is very, very strong. And of course, even against non-charge builds, just generally being able to go in defense mode and then being able to dodge a first hit makes it difficult for some builds to even really deal with you. They can try to AoE and they can try to like multi-attack, but it's just rough. It's just rough to try to fight through Prescient Circlets. It's one of the most frustrating things. We do, of course, have Fated Projectiles, which gives 20% crit to only ranged and battle mage units. I really hope that gets changed to include support units. That would be nice. I'm not sure why support units are excluded. It's not even that great of a buff. It's only 20% crit. Artisan armaments at tier 2 gives 25%. So that's odd, to say the least. Foresee Downfall is a pretty decent siege project. Once you have 3 siege projects, you'll have Harassed Defenders, you'll have Fumigate, and you'll have 4C Downfall. These 3 will generally make you impossible to really lose a siege. Every one of your attacks getting a 10% crit chance, every one of their attacks getting a 10% fumble chance over the course of a battle will just be annoying and generally win it for you. Battle Divination is okay if you are fighting a complete ranged enemy. It's pretty good. Do note though that ranged enemies aren't really that common to begin with. You've got ranged builds who generally have automatic hits, battle mages who generally have automatic hits, and skirmishers who also generally have automatic hits. Evasion's really only good for long con, like resisting damage over the course of a fight. It's not really good as a snapshot type deal, right? And I generally think it's better and it's more worth to play around Cascading Command Defend, especially if we look at its mana and casting cost. We will not have a lot of casting magic with this build. We don't have Death Magic and we don't have Astral. Eventually we will be able to get into the Astral Tree and get the 20 combat casting from that, but you know, we're only getting Astral at tier 4, sorry, at tier 3, our 4th and 5th tome, so we generally can't really rely on that. Temple of the Prophet is fine. It's mana and knowledge when you put it next to your what do you call it, monastery. It's fine. It's fine. You guys, whenever I say something's fine, I mean, yeah, it's fine. When I say something's fine, it means it's, yeah, it's fine. Now right here is cool. Now why is that? Because we go Tome of Prosperity, which gives us our, yeah, you guessed it, 6 Order Affinity. Tome of Prosperity is just generally your bread and butter as any melee build. Blessed Armors allows you to eat up any harassment. Staves of Grace is outrageously good at allowing your support units to just continue to support even harder. Anytime they use a support ability, they get 1 grace. So your Tome of Alchemy support ability will give a grace. Your heal will give a grace. Later on, if you do move to oracles, that's AoE grace. Blessed Cleansing Rain will allow you to remove steadfast from enemies, which can be quite funny when you do it to them. It can also just full cleanse buffs off allies, so you can just go, you know, if there's debuffs on your dudes, you can just go gone. If enemy just buffed up a stack of units, you can be gone. Cleansing Rain's a pretty good ability. It does make supports pretty strong. As for the rest of it, I don't really like the rest of it. Grand Protection, once again, I don't really want to use Grand Protection. I've used it if a fight kind of goes down to like a 6v6 skirmish. If I'm like attacking a side city, if there's like a 6v6 skirmish, then Grand Protection can be pretty decent. Gives you grace, regeneration, bolstered defense, bolstered resistance. If you don't have a full army stack with battle saints or maybe a ritualist or something, then you generally won't have all these buffs flying around all the time. In that case, I think Grand Protection will be a pretty good power turn. But again, I mean, you have to value the Cascading Command Reposition to get into range, and then the Cascading Command Defense spam, because giving you 3 fortune and a strengthen and cleansing 2 and ending your turn in defense mode, like, oh my god, that's a lot of work here. And then up last is our Tome of Supremacy. Now, Tome of Supremacy is where we get the Exemplar. It also allows us to buff up support units a little bit, making them deal a little bit extra spirit damage. Not a lot, but a little bit. 2 becomes 4, so they get 4 spirit damage. If they end up killing an enemy, they cause it to explode. That is a jank way to get around reviving builds. Just do remember that if a support unit with Supreme Magic kills an enemy unit, they will explode, which means they do not revive. That is pretty much this build's only real option for dealing with revive spam builds, and it is jank and it's not going to be very great, so you can remember it. Revive spam builds are kind of like, I like, some shield units are already coming at this game from being like a bottom tier class, so there's only so much I could do to try to counter everything. You know, we got the counter for charge units, we got the counter for battle mages over here and down here, but the one flaw in our build is our counter to revive spamming is not the greatest counter. And of course we get the Exemplar. This is our tier 4 racial unit. The Exemplar, as you have seen, has been buffed a lot since he was last seen in the Giants King expansion. In the Archon Prophecy expansion, he's very, very strong. Very fast and flying, lots of HP. He can embolden allies in turn 1 now, so you get 2 strengthened immediately off the rip, so your damage is just already going to be buffed. So I really like the Exemplar. Now, he does have that graceful defense. So turn 1, he gets Emboldened Allies, buffs him up. And to turn 2, you can maybe do a Cascading Command reposition to run him into range, and he'll still keep that grace. And every time you do Cascading Command defend, he gets another stack of grace. So he ends up being a pretty tanky boy. And then lastly, we have the Anthem of Victory. I don't tend to use this spell a lot, but it can be good if your line breaks and you're starting to skirmish on more sides of the map and you can't really reform the line because it would waste too many units' turns to do it. You can use Anthem of Victory, and it will give you global 3 strengthen, 3 fortune because of the order orb, and 15 morale. The morale is also decent because if a build is trying to morale you out, which is pretty common these days, Anthem of Victory basically just goes no, especially because Exemplars cause you to gain 25% more total morale. When you gain 25% more total morale, that Anthem of Victory just goes no, and globally you'll just be back at high morale, so that ends up being pretty strong. Now I would show you the Tome of the Big Construct. What is that called? Tome of the God Construct? Tome of the Creator. There we go. I would show you it in the list there, but because it's not factoring in my Vision of Destiny Materium, unfortunately I can't pick it in that list, which is a bit annoying. At any rate, we get, once we go into the Tome of the Creator, 3 things we generally don't really care that much about, and then Shaper's Touch. Tome of the God Emperor is just really bad. Otherwise, I might do a version of this with Angels. I have tried a version with this in Angels. I just don't think you end up lacking damage. The combo of Resonant Blades and Elemental gives you more damage. Later on, the natural regeneration and hit points and the little bit of lightning resist from Shaper's Touch keeps you on the board for far longer. So you'll generally win longer fights by having more morale gen, by having more healing, by critting enemies' morale down, by being able to shred away their armor into big ranger crits. And I mean big ranger crits. I mean, I do have a VOD of this game, if you go watch it, I'm talking like my ranger between his kill shot into snapshot into his actual shot, like we're talking 200, 250 damage output to enemies and to late game enemies. So quite a damaging fella. I had 1 ranger in my build, so my build was 2 rangers and a battle saint to just do global regeneration. I used a battle saint because they're a bit better at doing global effects, and the global regeneration was pretty good at just counteracting Blades of Decay and keeping my units on the board, because always Blades of Decay would have shut me down. And between the 2 rangers, I had 1 with the crossbow and sword who could run into reposition. I had another one who just sat back behind the line. That guy only ever had a tier 1 bow, and he was like doing, like, oh my god, he would do so much damage with that tier 1 bow. It was insanity. And then of course we've got the Call of Titan Earth. He's fine in a pinch. It's just his build doesn't have the most mana. I should say combat casting. You will eventually have unlimited mana as any build, but we don't have the most combat casting, and when we don't have the most combat casting, we can't really be chunking down 65 of it to call down the Titan of Earth, despite how good he is and despite how many times he's been buffed. For the most part, we're going to try to do Cascading Command defend as much as we can, Cascading Command reposition to maintain our haste if we can, and that's generally how it's going to be. Now, that's it for how this build is going to work in its strength, but of course we do have, I'm actually wondering here, I'm going to open up one thing to show you guys because I think it's actually really good for how you build your heroes. We had a Battle Saint and we had Rangers. Now, you can build the Battle Saint just to be a healer, and that's fine. Just go down the left. You really can't miss it, right? Like, how could you... It's pretty obvious what's going on there, right? But the Ranger is a bit more complicated. So I'm going to open up the Age of Wonders database, and we're going to look at the class here so that I can actually tell you guys exactly what to do with your Ranger so you can do the most damage. Now, there's 3 different ways to go about this. There is Snapshot, Sniper Shot, and Scatter Shot. All 3 of them are generally fine for dealing damage, but all 3 of them will do the same thing. We're going to go like that if we're doing Scatter Shot. If we're doing Sniper Shot, you might not believe it, but we're probably going to do that. And if we are doing Snapshot, we will do like that. That's because Big Game Hunter is really good at dealing more damage. And the kill shot allows us to reset go for the kill, which just gives us 50% damage every round as long as we're killing a unit. And with this much damage from shredding up enemies' armor and then just beating the crap out of them, we will generally, yeah, we're gonna find a way to get a kill. Now, once we do this, how are we going to get down here? Well, we're going to go down this direction. Now, why is that? That's because we get 20% crit here, and then we get, every time we crit an enemy, we do 10% more damage. That stacks up to 50% more crit damage. Now, we want to build a bow with bonus crit damage as well, because when we have this much crit from fortune, from having crit here, from putting some crit on the bow, from having high morale, just fortune and high morale alone are already 50% crit. So here's 70%. Put some crit on your bow, there's 90% right there, basically for free. You can also get fortune when you kill a unit, so you don't really need to worry. Even if they're giving you misfortune, they'll only be removing your fortune, not really doing that much. And when we have 220% crit damage, that is an outrageous damage multiplier. When we combo that again with go for the kill, then multiplying that total damage by 50%, that's a lot. If you do manage to find yourself leveling up a lot, the ideal way to play is like this. On the left tree, I generally like to go with Decisive Command and some XP early. This generally is how I like to set up my heroes. We also like Defensive Formation. That one's pretty good as well. It's on you. Generally, I like to go down here first, then go down here. When you get Defensive Formation, you do make yourself, well, you make your build way tankier. Decisive Command's really good. You can run up a shield unit, hit an enemy, Decisive Command, hit them 3 times. That shreds 4 armor, potentially gives you a stun in the early game if that's what you're looking for. So Decisive Command has some really good synergy with what we're doing with this build. Then we look at these things down here. Initiate of Order to get Zeal. Zeal is just 2 more damage on attacks. That is 4 damage on the single shot from the sword and crossbow, and then 2 damage on the snapshot here. As you might imagine, doing 6 more damage on your snapshot regular shot combo is going to add up pretty quickly. Then we're going to go Adept of Materium to grab Meteor Strikes. Now base attacks deal 4 more damage to the target and adjacent enemies. Increased for single shots. So it's 4 damage on the snapshot, 8 damage on the single shot. Yeah, it's pretty devastating. Then you can kind of decide how you want to play around here. There are some different things that you can do, but I generally just went, I think I just went Master of Order and left it at that point because we're starting to get screwed for points. But we did decide to go with Paragon of Materium. Now I had a Battle Saint who's Paragon of Materium, and I decided to not give him Ancient of Earth. I really liked him being on a flying mount in the background because he was just like flap, flap, flap over here, flap, flap, flap over here. He was doing a lot of stuff. I kept him with a shield and he was just tanky and he was just flapping around helping everybody. I could have given him a staff, an Ancient of Earth. Maybe that would have been better. I don't know. I didn't do that. Anyway, Ancient of Earth is another 30% damage multiplier. Big damage with the feudal aristocracy 40 HP that does apply to your hero, and the 20 hit points here. That's 70 hit points there already because you have the tier 5 transformation for elementals, or I shouldn't say transformation, tier 5 enchantment. So you have 40 HP from feudal aristocracy, 20 HP here. There's 60, 70 with your tier 5 tome. Will generally be at the very least not squishy. That's 150 HP right there. So Rangers generally have issues with HP. They don't have any. Well, with all the resistance we're going to be getting from our shield units and shield wall and our supports in their whatever stance theirs is called, combo that with the defense here, the defense here, and the defense here, and all the evasion, we're basically going to be impossible to hit with a ranged attack that doesn't auto hit. The outrageous damage output, our shield boys will be up front just shielding and kind of, you know, they can do fine on their own, but the ranger's going to be in the back just going pow, pow, every turn, pow, pow. And that's quite devastating. I don't really care about sniper's focus, focused aim, bastard focus. I don't really care about these because at the end of the day, the whole advantage of the sword and crossbow is that it only takes 1 AP to shoot and 0 to shoot snapshot. So you can run into a position behind your dudes or into a different position, wherever you set up a low health enemy, go for the kill, snapshot, shoot your crossbow, kabam, they take 150 damage, big explosion, everybody dies. So I think this is a really good build for Ranger, and I actually went with 2 of these. I had one with a multi-shot who stayed more, you know, still, and then I had my Lord with the sword and crossbow because I wanted him to be mobile so I could always make sure to keep him into a safe location, because sometimes even a Liege Guard will not be enough to keep him alive through enemies being very, very, very angry at him. Okay, so in total, outrageous damage. The build, it is a bit slow in the early game, and we make shield units actually good for once. Shield units stand on the front line. Now, I would recommend what you do is have 4 shield units and a bannerman, and then your lord in every stack. In your 3 stacks, I went with a battle saint, 2 rangers. So it's 3 supports, 2 ranged heroes, 1 support hero. I did give the battle saint a shield though. Generally, between his shield and the Liege Guard warding for him, nobody really even bothered to try to focus him. The Battle Saint, once we do give him a Bless Wand, I mean, you have to kind of get an Arc on Blood. It's a bit unfair how that setup is right now, but if you do give him that Bless Wand, he's going to run around every other turn. That is something that's actually really dumb as well. If you have a Bless Wand on a Ranger and you get a kill every turn, this will actually reset all ability cooldowns. This does work with every item, so even if you get the item that allows you to summon the plant thing from shrubs, you can actually then summon him every single turn with Killshot resetting the cooldown. Go wild with item effects. So long as you get a kill every turn, you can use your items every turn. It's kind of silly. I used it with Bless Wands, so what I would do is I would bless a unit and then I would bless a unit every turn. And so because I was just constantly blessing my front line, they just had so much, they had infinite strength and infinite fortune, which they already generally had. But even if my enemies were trying to stack me with misfortune, it really didn't matter. And I could keep their strength up, their bolstered resistance up. It was kind of silly, to be fair. It also meant that beginning in a battle, even if they removed all my buffs, I could just be like, ta-da, I bless myself again. I don't know. I don't feel like it's right that, you know, you can just bless yourself, but I guess people are a little bit less strict with canon these days. At any rate, that is my no Paladin Paladin build. I actually think this is a bit silly, and you're probably gonna have to try a bit harder than my other builds to make this work, but I actually had a lot of fun with it and I enjoyed it a lot. So thank you all for making it to the end of this video. Thank you all for watching. I think this build is quite fun. I think it's actually one of the dumbest and most fun builds I've done. So if you actually enjoy kind of silly, janky builds that feel like they shouldn't be working despite the fact that they're working really well, then this build is absolutely perfect for that. So once again, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to leave a comment down below on any of your thoughts. And as always, I hope all of you have a great rest of your day.